There is a version of this story where he said the right thing immediately, where he looked up from his book, studied her face for exactly 1 second, and said, gently, kindly, without cruelty, "I think you might have the wrong person." She would have laughed, a little embarrassed. He would have smiled, a little sorry, and they would have spent the rest of their lives as strangers. That version of the story exists. He simply chose a different one. His name was James Calloway. He was 31 years old. He had a book open on the table in front of him, a cup of coffee that had gone exactly the temperature he preferred, not hot enough to burn, not cold enough to disappoint, and he was, by every reasonable measure, invisible. The cafe was called Marlowe's. It occupied the ground floor of a narrow building in the part of the city that still had cobblestones on the side streets, and on a Thursday evening in late October it held exactly the kind of quiet that James had been professionally seeking for 3 hours. Not silence. Silence was too obvious. This was something gentler. The sound of other people's lives running parallel to his, without intersection. The espresso machine hissing. Someone's phone ringing once and stopping. Rain beginning outside without announcement. He was on page 47 of a novel he had already read twice before, which is the only way he ever read anything he truly loved. He did not notice her walking in. He noticed her sitting down, directly across from him, at his table, which was not her table. Or rather, it was her table. It had simply, in the 30 minutes before she arrived, also become his. He looked up. She was already looking at him. And before he could say a single word, before the correct, honest, ordinary sentence could form, she exhaled slowly, smiled in a way that was exhausted and relieved in equal measure, and said, "I'm sorry I'm late. I almost didn't come." James Calloway made a decision in the space of one breath. It was not a good decision. It was the most important decision of his life. He said, "I'm glad you did." Her name was Nora Voss. He would not learn this for another 22 minutes. What he understood in the first 30 seconds, assembled from the way she unwound her scarf with the practiced exhaustion of someone who had been dreading this evening, was that she was here against her better judgment. She had argued herself into this cafe and had very nearly argued herself back out. She set her bag on the chair beside her and looked at him with an expression he could not quite name, not warmth exactly, not coldness, something in between. The careful assessment of a person who has been disappointed before and has not yet decided whether to let themselves be surprised. "You look different than your photos," she said. James Calloway had exactly 0 photos anywhere online. "People usually do," he said. She tilted her head slightly. Is that a confession or a deflection? Probably both. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile. The place just before a smile. He noticed it the way you notice a door opening in a house you had assumed was empty. He should have told her then. He had a second opportunity, clear as a window, with no curtain. She had given him an opening. She was even, in a small way, testing him. Seeing what came back. What he should have sent back was the truth. What he sent back instead was a question. "You said you almost didn't come." He closed his book. "What made you?" She looked at him for a moment. "My friend," she said. "She told me I had to stop treating the possibility of something good as evidence that something bad was coming." James sat with that sentence longer than a stranger should have. "Smart friend," he said. "Relentlessly smart," Nora said. Also never wrong, which is an incredibly annoying quality in a person. That time, she did smile. It was a small smile. Sideways. Like she had decided to offer it before she finished deciding whether to. James understood something in that moment that he had no right to understand, which was that this woman was not shy. She was guarded. There is a difference, so substantial it may as well be a different word entirely. Shy people are afraid of the space they occupy in a room. Guarded people have simply learned, through specific experiences they have never fully described to anyone, that the space they occupy is not always safe. He recognized it because he was one of them. He recognized it the way you recognize a word in a language you thought you had forgotten. She picked up the menu. She did not open it. She held it with the particular grip of someone who needs something to hold while thinking. I have to be honest with you, she said. James went very still. I've been on 3 of these, she said. 3 setups. And the first one was a perfectly nice person who talked about his ex-girlfriend for 40 minutes without noticing I existed. And the second one was a perfectly nice person who spent the dinner explaining to me why my job was less impressive than he had expected. She set the menu down. And the third one left while I was in the bathroom. Not in a dramatic way. Just gone. Money on the table, coat gone. She said this not with self-pity. With the flat, clear-eyed delivery of a woman who has cataloged the evidence and is presenting it accurately. So, she said, I want to be fair to you. And being fair to you means telling you that I am not easy to impress, and I am not especially looking to be impressed, and I would genuinely prefer one honest conversation over whatever a first date is supposed to look like. James thought about the man who was at this moment, presumably standing somewhere outside or at another table or running late from wherever he actually was, fully unaware that someone was currently sitting across from his blind date telling her the truth about herself. He thought about this. And then he said the only honest thing he could find. That sounds like exactly the kind of conversation I'd want to have. She studied him for a moment. You're not what I expected, she said. I get that a lot. She didn't laugh. But the place before the laugh appeared again, briefly, in her eyes, before she looked back at the menu. He had now been lying to her for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It felt, he would think later, like considerably longer. He learned her name when she introduced herself to the server. Nora, she said, when the server asked. And whatever he's having is probably fine for me too. James ordered the thing he had already been drinking. She accepted it with the quiet trust of someone deciding, for one evening, to stop making every decision alone. Nora Voss. He repeated it privately, the way you repeat a word when you want to understand its weight before you use it. She worked in urban architecture. Not designing buildings exactly. She was a preservationist, someone who spent her professional life looking at what had already been built and arguing, sometimes loudly, for why it deserved to continue existing. Most people think preservation is about the past, she said. It isn't. It's about arguing that the past made something that the present hasn't figured out how to replace yet. Do you win those arguments? About half the time. She turned her coffee cup slowly in both hands, which is more than most people expect and less than it should be. He told her he was an architect. This was true. He had been a structural engineer for 6 years before a project in his second firm changed the way he thought about buildings entirely, not what held them up, but what made people want to stay inside them. He had retrained. He now designed mostly residential spaces, and mostly for clients who wanted something that felt like it had always been there, even when it was brand new. That's interesting, she said. We probably hate each other professionally. Probably, he agreed. You build new things that look old. You fight to save old things because they are old. There's a distinction, she said. I know, he said. I just can't always find it. She looked at him with something that was almost suspicion, except it carried too much interest to be suspicion entirely. My friend described you differently, she said. He kept his expression exactly as it was. How did she describe me? Nora tilted her head slightly, remembering. Quiet. Careful. She said you were the kind of person who listens more than they talk, and that most people mistake that for shyness, when it's actually just intention. James said nothing. He was, in fact, listening more than talking. He was, in fact, exactly what had been described. He was simply not the person who had been described. She wasn't wrong, he said. No, Nora said, studying him. She wasn't. There was a moment then that James would return to many times afterward, trying to locate the exact point at which the lie became something other than a lie. It was not this moment. But this moment was close to it. The server came. They ordered food neither of them had entirely decided on, the way people order food when conversation is the real meal, and they have only just figured that out. Can I ask you something? Nora said. Yes. Why did you say you were glad I came? He looked at her. I mean, she continued, I had only just sat down.
You didn't know anything about me yet.
So, what made you glad? He could have deflected. He had been deflecting with remarkable skill for nearly 30 minutes. Instead, he said, because you came when you almost didn't. And I think that took something. She was quiet. Most people wait until they're ready, he said. You came before you were ready. I find that, I don't know, harder to do than it looks. She looked at her cup. My therapist would like you, she said. Why? Because that's exactly what she's been trying to get me to do for 2 years. She glanced up. And you just said it in 8 seconds. I had the advantage of not knowing you yet, he said. That makes it easier to see. She was quiet again, but the quality of the quiet had changed. It had moved from the guarded silence of someone deciding how much to reveal, to the softer, more complicated silence of someone who had just been seen more clearly than expected and did not entirely know what to do about it. This was the moment he should have told her. He understood this, even then. Instead, he said, tell me about a building you saved. And she did. For the next 20 minutes, she described a former textile mill in the city's eastern district that she had spent 3 years fighting to preserve against a developer who wanted to replace it with something that would have been perfectly nice and completely forgettable. She described the original architecture, load-bearing brick, timber floors worn smooth by 100 years of machinery and human movement, light coming through north-facing windows that had been engineered to keep fabric from fading and now, almost accidentally, created the most extraordinary afternoon light she had ever seen inside a structure. She had won. The building was now a community arts center. She had not been inside it since it opened. He asked why. She looked at the table for a moment. Because the version I fought for existed in my head for 3 years, she said. And I'm afraid the real version won't match it. And I'm not sure I could stand losing the one I imagined. He understood this. He understood it the way you understand something that someone has said in a different language that is still somehow your first. You could go, he said, and be surprised. I could, she said. Or I could keep the version that's perfect. The perfect version isn't real.
No, she said.
But it's mine. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the man who was supposed to be sitting here. He thought about what that man was missing. He thought about how the lie he was maintaining was becoming, sentence by sentence, the most honest conversation he had been part of in years. These 4 thoughts arrived in sequence and did not comfort him at all. James Calloway had not planned on being in Marlowe's that evening. He had planned on being home. He had a project deadline the following morning, a proposal for a family in the northern part of the city who wanted a house that felt inherited rather than built. He had been working on the framing for the entrance hallway for 3 days and could not find the proportion that felt right, and so he had done what he sometimes did when a problem refused to yield to effort. He had stopped trying to solve it and gone somewhere that smelled like coffee and old wood and let his mind go somewhere else for a few hours. He had chosen Marlowe's because it was small and it was quiet, and because the table by the back window caught the last 20 minutes of light in a way that made everything feel manageable. He had arrived at 6:15. He had not expected to still be there at 8. He had not expected any of this. His own last relationship had ended 11 months ago.
Her name was Sylvie.
She was a landscape designer who was brilliant and generous and had loved him, he believed quite genuinely. The problem was not love. The problem was that James was the kind of person who experienced life at a slight remove from himself, as though there was always a pane of glass between him and whatever was happening, and Sylvie had eventually, very kindly, told him that she could not spend the rest of her life pressing her hands against glass, hoping the pressure would eventually reach him. He had not argued.
He had known she was right.
He had also not known how to fix it. Since then, he had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment where the second bedroom was full of drafting equipment, and the first was full of the particular silence of a person who has learned to be comfortable with solitude because the alternative requires a vulnerability he has not yet figured out how to afford. He was not unhappy. He was simply very, very careful. And now he was sitting across from a woman who was also very careful, who had also been disappointed in specific and catalogued ways, who was also here against her better judgment, and something between them was moving in a direction that felt impossibly like recognition. "Can I ask you something now?" he said. She looked up. "Fair. The friend who set this up. How did you finally agree to it?" Nora's expression shifted, something complicated crossing through it like weather. "She sat with me for 2 hours in my apartment," she said slowly. "2 Sundays ago. And she didn't say anything for most of it. Just made me coffee and sat on the other end of the sofa while I explained all the reasons it was a bad idea."
She paused.
"And then when I'd run out of reasons, she said, 'You're not protecting yourself, Nora. You're just very good at making prisons look like shelters.'" James did not move. "And then," Nora said, "she said she had someone she wanted me to meet." She looked at her cup. "I said no for 3 weeks. She is very persistent. The relentlessly smart one. The very same. A beat. She said you were someone who had also spent a long time building things for other people and had forgotten, somewhere in the process, to build anything for himself." James set his coffee down. He set it down carefully, because what Nora had just described was not a blind date setup. It was a precise, personal portrait of a man who was not sitting across from her, delivered by someone who knew that man well enough to describe him this way. And it was also, with a precision that made James briefly wonder if the universe had opinions, an accurate description of James himself.
"She said that," he said.
Verbatim. Nora watched him. Does it sound wrong? It did not sound wrong. It sounded true in the way that things sound true when they have been assembled by someone paying attention over a long period of time. "No," he said. "Then why do you look like someone just walked over your grave?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because," he said, "being described that accurately by someone who cares about you it's a specific kind of feeling." She held his gaze. "Uncomfortable. A little."
He paused.
"Also, the opposite of lonely." She was quiet. Her coffee had gone cold. He noticed she didn't drink it, just held it. He noticed she held things she wasn't using, as though she needed more hands than the world had provided for everything she was managing at once. He noticed this because he did the same thing. He was noticing too many things. "I should tell you something," he said. His heart was doing something inconvenient. She looked at him. He stopped. The sentence he had started was, "I'm not who you think I am." What came out instead, after a pause that lasted several seconds too long, was, "I'm not usually this easy to talk to." She blinked. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't name. "Neither am I," she said. And they sat with that for a moment, the mutual acknowledgement of two careful people finding, against their own expectations, that the glass between themselves and experience had thinned to something almost transparent. His phone was in his jacket pocket. It had not vibrated once in 2 hours. The man who was supposed to be here, the real date, the person whose chair James was sitting in, whose evening he had accidentally stolen, had also not arrived. James understood, sitting there, that something had gone wrong on the other end. A cancellation. A miscommunication. A crisis of confidence perhaps not unlike the one Nora had described overcoming, except this one had won. He understood something else. If the real man had simply been late, he would have walked through the door by now. No one was coming. There was only this. This cafe, this window with rain against the glass, this woman holding a cold cup of coffee with both hands, this conversation that had become the most real thing James had experienced in 11 months. And a lie he had now been maintaining for an hour and a half.
The food arrived.
Neither of them had been particularly hungry, and the arrival of plates seemed briefly absurd, proof that an ordinary evening had continued to operate around the edges of something that was no longer ordinary. She ate carefully. He noticed she arranged things slightly before eating them, not obsessively, just the habitual precision of someone who spent her days thinking about how space should be organized and had let it migrate into her private hours. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked up. "Something you wouldn't normally say on a first date," she clarified. I told you about the mill. That cost me something to say out loud. Your turn. He set his fork down. He thought, I could tell her right now. Right here. Something true. The truest thing. He thought, I am not who you believe I am. I am a stranger who sat down at the wrong time at a table that happened to be yours, and I made one bad decision that I have now been remaking for 90 minutes, and the reason I keep remaking it is sitting across from me holding a fork and watching me with eyes that see things I am not used to being seen. He thought all of this. He said, I design homes for people to live their lives in, and I haven't figured out how to do that for myself. She was still. What does your apartment look like? She asked. Functional, he said. Organized. There's a drafting table in the second bedroom and a couch in the living room that I bought because it was the right scale for the space, not because I particularly liked it. A couch you don't like. It's fine. James. She said his name, the name she believed was his, and something in his chest contracted. You spend your professional life thinking about how spaces make people feel, and you live in an apartment with a couch you chose for its proportions. Yes. That's either very disciplined or very sad. Probably both, he said. And then, because she had given him something and he owed her something back, he said, I had a relationship end last year. She said I experienced everything from behind glass. Like there was always distance between me and whatever was actually happening.
He paused.
She wasn't wrong. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Why do you think you do that? She said. Because being fully present means being fully affected, he said. And being fully affected means there's a cost. And you've been managing the cost for a long time. She looked at the table, then back at him. I had a relationship end 2 years ago, she said. Before the terrible date parade. His name was Daniel. He was very good, smart and kind, and he wanted a life with me in a way that was completely real. The whole thing was real. She turned her cup in her hands. And I kept waiting to feel something catastrophic, and I never did. Just warmth, steadiness, safety, a pause. I ended it. He waited. Because, she said slowly, safety felt like settling. And I thought I should want something that also terrified me. Something that cost me something to want. She shook her head. 2 years later, I'm sitting in a cafe telling a stranger about it, so you can draw your own conclusions about the wisdom of that decision. James sat with what she had said. He sat with it carefully. She had ended something real, because it had not frightened her. He had maintained distance from real things because being close to them did. They had arrived at the same empty place from opposite directions. Maybe, he said, the thing that should terrify you isn't the feeling. Maybe it's the willingness to stay. She looked at him. To stay when it's uncertain, he said. To stay when you don't know what it becomes. That's the part that costs something. The rain outside had become the particular steady kind that doesn't vary, that simply continues as though rain is the default state of things and everything else is the interruption. You're easier to talk to than I expected, she said. You said that. I mean it differently now. She studied him. At first I thought it was that you were just skilled at it. That you'd done this before, the setup thing, and you knew how to make it comfortable.
She paused.
But that's not it. He held his expression exactly still. It's that you're not performing, she said. Most people on a first date are performing a version of themselves they hope is better than the real one. You're just here. The irony of this landed on him like something physical. He was, in fact, performing the most elaborate pretense he had ever maintained. He was not himself. He was an unnamed stranger wearing the borrowed clothes of someone else's introduction. And somehow, in the process of performing that fiction, he had been more honest about himself than he had been in months. I think, he said carefully, that sometimes the safest place to be yourself is with someone who doesn't know you yet. Because they have no expectations, she said. Because everything you offer them is new. He paused. There's no version of you they're comparing you to. She looked at him for a long time. That's either the most insightful thing anyone said to me on a date, she said, or the most elaborate excuse for not letting someone actually know you? He said nothing, because it was both. It was, with a clarity that he felt in the specific place behind his ribs where true things land, entirely both. It was the book that found him out. Not that evening. He had almost made it. She had noticed it when she sat down, the cover visible above his jacket pocket, but the conversation had moved too fast for her to ask. Now, at the end of the meal, while he was settling the bill despite her protests, she picked it up from where it had migrated beside his plate and turned it in her hands. "You're rereading it," she said. He looked up. She was studying the inside front cover, where something was written in pen, the ink slightly faded. "May I?" she said, which was a question she had already answered by reading. He watched her eyes move across the inscription. He knew what it said. He had written it himself years ago, in the front of a book he had bought at a second-hand shop and given to no one because he had kept it. "To whoever reads this after me," she read aloud. "May the distance feel like wonder rather than exile." She looked up. "You wrote this?" "Yes." "In your own book?"
"It was a habit," he said.
"I buy used books and write in them and shelve them, like a message in a bottle that doesn't go anywhere." She looked at the inscription again. "Distance as wonder rather than exile," she said softly. She set the book down. "That's not a casual thought."
"No."
"That's someone who has lived inside a specific feeling for a long time." He said nothing. "The glass thing," she said. "That you mentioned. The distance." She was watching him carefully now. Not suspiciously, but with the focus of someone who has located the seam in something and is following it with a fingertip. "You didn't just understand what your ex said. You'd already named it." James looked at the book. "Yes," he said. "So, what changed tonight?" He looked up. "The glass," she said. "You said you experienced things from behind it, but you haven't been behind it tonight. I've been watching. You've been here." A pause. What changed? He looked at her for a long time. There was a version of the next 60 seconds in which he told her everything. It was not a comfortable version. It involved her expression doing something he did not want to watch. It involved the warmth of the last 2.5 hours becoming something else entirely. Embarrassment, anger, the specific cold clarity of someone who has realized they've been deceived by someone they had begun to trust. But it was the true version. He opened his mouth. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked at the screen. The text was from a number he didn't recognize. It read, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time. I'm outside Marlowe's. Are you still there? I'm the worst. I know. Please tell me you waited." James read the message twice. He understood immediately. The real date. Not a cancellation. Simply late. Impossibly, catastrophically late, in the way that changed everything by the time it arrived. He looked up at Nora. She was watching him with the quiet attentiveness of someone who notices things. "Everything okay?" she said. He put his phone in his pocket. He made his second decision. "Yes," he said. "Wrong number." He walked her out. The rain had softened into something that was almost not rain, a fine diffusion of cold that turned the cobblestones dark and made the streetlights multiply themselves in every puddle. She had her scarf back. She was taller in heels than he had registered while sitting, which shouldn't have been a thing he noticed, and was anyway. They stood on the pavement outside Marlowe's for a moment, without moving.
"Thank you," she said.
"For this. For whatever this was." "Whatever it was," he agreed. She smiled. The sideways one. The one she gave before she had finished deciding whether to. "I'm going to go to the mill," she said. "Next weekend." He looked at her. "You talked me into it," she said. "You and your possibly sad apartment couch." "I'm glad." "I might hate it." "You might," he said. "But it'll be yours." She looked at him. He was aware, in the way you are aware of things at the exact moment you are losing them, that this was the last 30 seconds of something he had no right to and could not keep. The real date was somewhere nearby, presumably having composed a second apologetic text by now. Nora's phone was in her bag. She had not checked it once in 2.5 hours. She would check it. And then, "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes. I came here expecting to get through an hour. Just manage it. Be polite, make an excuse, go home." She looked up at the rain. "I didn't expect to still be here." A pause. "I didn't expect to want to still be here." James said nothing. Because he had no language for what he was doing, which was simultaneously the most generous and most selfish thing he had ever done. He had given her a real evening, a conversation that had reached her. He had also given it to her under a name that wasn't his, and an identity he had borrowed without permission. "I'd like to do this again," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the specific courage of someone who has been disappointed before and is choosing, deliberately, to be brave anyway.
"If you wanted to," she said.
"No pressure. No setup. Just us.
Coffee.
Maybe a couch that you actually like." He breathed in. The honest version of the next sentence was, "Nora, my name isn't what you think it is. I am not who you were set up with. I sat at the wrong table at the wrong time, and I made a decision that I have been remaking every minute of the last 2.5 hours. I don't know what this was, but everything I told you is true. The glass, the couch, the distance. Everything I said about myself was real, and the name was the only part one borrowed." He had that sentence ready. He had rehearsed it in 7 different orders. And she was looking at him with the careful hope of someone who has been making prisons look like shelters and had, for one evening, left the door open. "I'd like that," he said. But he held up a hand before she could respond.
"First," he said.
"I need to tell you something." She went still. "I've been trying to tell you all evening," he said. "And I keep almost saying it and then I don't, and I understand that doesn't make it better. I just want you to know it wasn't easy not to say." She looked at him carefully. He told her. Not the long version. Not the version with justifications and context and reasons. Those would come later if there was a later. The short version. He had been sitting at that table when she arrived. He had looked up and understood within seconds that she believed he was someone else. And he had chosen, in the space of one breath, not to correct it. He told her the name on the text, the man who had arrived too late. He told her that everything else, the glass, the couch, the book, the mill, every word of the last 2.5 hours, was him. Not a character, not a borrowed identity, just him. Offered honestly from inside a frame he had no right to. She said nothing. The rain continued. He waited. "Your name," she said finally. "James." No. She looked at the pavement. He watched her. She was not a woman who showed everything in her face. He had learned this across 2.5 hours of paying close attention. What moved through her now was something she was processing internally, turning it like a stone in her hands to find its actual weight. "The book inscription," she said. "Mine. The couch. Mine. What you said about staying." She looked up. "About the thing that should terrify you being the willingness to stay when it's uncertain." "Mine," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long time. "Why didn't you say anything?" she said. "At the beginning." He had prepared the honest answer for this too. "Because you said you were glad you came," he said. "And you said you almost didn't." "And he stopped. "I knew the right thing was to tell you immediately. I also knew that if I did, that sentence, 'I almost didn't come,' would have been the end of your evening. And maybe the end of the next one you tried." He paused. "I told myself I was protecting something. I was. I just don't know if it was you I was protecting or myself." She looked away.
Not sharply.
With the slow deliberateness of someone who needs a moment that isn't being watched. He gave it to her. When she looked back, her expression had not resolved into anything simple. It held anger and something else. He waited to learn what the something else was. "My friend," she said, "described you as someone who listens more than he talks, and that most people mistake it for shyness, when it's actually intention." "Yes," he said. She was describing someone else. "Yes. But she was also," Nora said slowly, describing you. He said nothing. Which means, she said, that you sat at that table and by pure accident fit the description of the person I was supposed to meet. Not in every detail, but in the ones that mattered. She shook her head, a small, disbelieving movement. Do you understand how strange that is? Yes, he said. Completely. She breathed out. I need to think, she said. I know. I need to be angry about this for a minute. That's fair. Possibly longer than a minute. Also fair. She looked at him. James, she said. It was the first time she had said his real name. She knew it was his real name. It landed differently. Yes. Don't disappear while I'm thinking. He looked at her. There was nothing hidden in what she'd said. No layering. No subtext. Just a woman who had come here against her better judgment and had been surprised and had been deceived and was now standing in the rain asking a stranger not to become a different kind of wrong number. I won't, he said. She nodded once. She walked toward the street. She did not look back. But at the corner, the place where the cobblestones gave way to ordinary pavement and the streetlights made everything amber and soft, she stopped. Not for long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then she turned, not quite fully, just enough to be visible in profile. She was not smiling, but she was not done either. And then she rounded the corner and was gone. He did not disappear. He also did not contact her. He understood the difference. Disappearing was a choice. Silence was a condition. He would keep the condition and not make the choice, and whatever she did with the space he left open was hers to do with entirely. He went home that evening and stood in his apartment for a long time without turning on any lights. The couch was exactly where it had always been. He looked at it differently. He finished the proposal the next morning. The entrance hallway he had been unable to proportion for 3 days arranged itself in his mind around 6 a.m. with a clarity that was almost embarrassing in its simplicity. A wider threshold. A lower ceiling just slightly, just enough to make stepping through it feel like entering something. He sent it to his clients before breakfast. He thought about her every day. Not obsessively. The way you think about something that has shifted the angle of everything without announcing it, not loudly, but thoroughly. He thought about the mill she hadn't visited. He thought about the inscription in his book, which she had read and understood, without needing it explained. He thought about the moment at the corner, the almost turn, the 3 seconds when she had stopped without quite facing him. He thought about what it meant that she had asked him not to disappear. He was still thinking about it on the morning of the 17th day, standing in front of his bathroom mirror when his phone buzzed. A number he didn't have saved. He looked at it for a long moment before opening it. It was a photograph. No text. No explanation. Just a photograph. The interior of a building, taken from what he recognized from her description alone from the particular quality of the light as the textile mill. North-facing windows. Late morning light falling across timber floors worn smooth by a century of use and love and labor. An open space with exposed brick and, in the corner, 3 children doing something with watercolors at a low table, absorbed completely, not looking up. And the light. He had designed spaces his entire professional life. He understood light technically, the angle of incidence, the way it moved through a room, the way it made people feel safe or unsettled, spacious or enclosed, without ever knowing why. What she had found in that mill was not designed. It had evolved through 100 years of use by people who had no idea they were making something beautiful. They were just working. They were just alive inside a space that the light happened to reach perfectly. He sat down on the couch he didn't like. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he wrote back. For words. Was it worth it? He waited. 8 minutes. Then, yes. Then, after another pause. Also, I hate you a little bit for being right. He looked at his phone. He felt something move in his chest that was not the opposite of glass. It was something more like a window opening. He typed, I'm sorry. For all of it. She wrote back, I know. A pause. Then, I went on Sunday. By myself. I stood in that light for 20 minutes without moving and tried to decide what I felt. What did you feel? He wrote. Another pause. Long enough that he counted his own breath. Like it was worth fighting for, she wrote. And like I was embarrassed it took me this long to see it in person.
He sat with that.
Then, there's a farmer's market 2 blocks from there on Saturdays. Someone told me about it once. Terrible couch buying decisions are rumored to be made nearby. He read the message 3 times. He wrote, that sounds like someone with better taste. Someone with better taste and a significant grudge, she wrote back. I'd understand the grudge. You should. A pause.
Saturday.
10 o'clock. The market first. He looked at his apartment. The drafting table. The correctly proportioned couch he had never quite settled into. I'll be there, he wrote. And he was. She was already there when he arrived. Standing at a stall with winter vegetables arranged in such careful abundance, it looked considered. She had her hands in her jacket pockets, and she was looking at a bunch of dark-leafed kale with the expression of someone deciding whether to commit.
She saw him.
She did not smile immediately. She looked at him with the clear, unguarded assessment that he had first encountered across a cafe table, the look of someone who sees things accurately and has decided to let that accuracy be visible. You came, she said. I said I would. People say a lot of things. I know, he said. I'm aware.
A beat.
Then the sideways smile.
Small.
Decided. Hers. They walked through the market. She bought the kale and also apples she didn't need, and also a jar of something described on the handwritten label as winter citrus preserve because she liked the sound of it. He carried the bag without being asked and didn't mention it. They didn't talk about the cafe directly. Not yet. They talked about everything adjacent to it. The things they had said, revisited from the outside now, like 2 people who had been through something together and were still mapping its edges. She asked about his work. He told her about the entrance hallway, the lower ceiling, the wider threshold. You found the proportion, she said. That morning. After. She looked at him. After our. She considered the word. Whatever it was. After, he confirmed. She looked ahead. I talked to my therapist about it, she said. What did she say? She said the thing I needed to pay attention to is not what you did wrong. She glanced at him. She said pay attention to what you did when it would have been easier not to. He said nothing. You told me, she said. When it was expensive to. When the comfortable version was available. Not immediately. No, she said. Not immediately. She paused. But you told me before the corner. And what happened at the corner is what I keep thinking about. He waited. I stopped, she said. I was angry. I had every reason to walk away and never think about you again. And I stopped. A pause. Why do you think I stopped? He thought about it. Honestly. Because the thing I told you about staying, he said slowly. About the part that should terrify you being the willingness to stay when it's uncertain. She looked at him. You believed it, he said. More than you wanted to. She looked ahead again. I still have the grudge, she said. I know. It's going to be around for a while. I'll make room for it. She glanced at him sideways. That's very confident, she said. I'm designing for the long version, he said. Not just the entrance. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. They were at the edge of the market where the stalls gave way to a small square, and beyond the square the mill was visible. The one she had fought for, the one she had finally visited, the one that had turned out to be worth everything she had imagined, and also something she hadn't expected. She looked at it. He looked at her looking at it. What you said, she said. The night at the cafe. That the thing that should terrify you isn't the feeling. It's the willingness to stay. Yes. I've been thinking about it for 17 days. I know. She turned to him. I'm still thinking about it, she said. And they stood there in the morning light of a Saturday in late October, in front of a building that had been worth fighting for, with the farmer's market behind them and the city all around, and the apples in the bag, and the winter citrus preserve, and the grudge she'd said would be around for a while, and the couch they were going to replace at some point, and the entrance hallway with the lower ceiling that he had finally found the proportion for, and all the conversations that were still waiting to be had, unhurried, with nowhere in particular they needed to be. He had made a decision in the space of one breath. It had not been a good decision. It had been somehow exactly right. And she had stopped at a corner on a rainy night in October and not quite turned around, which was its own kind of decision, made in the same space, with the same specific courage of a person who has been making prisons look like shelters and had, finally, left the door open. Some people would say what happened between them began as a lie. Those people are not wrong. But what grew inside it, the glass thinning, the window opening, two careful people finding in each other the first place in a long time where carefulness was not required, that part was not a lie. That part was the truest thing either of them had said in years. And it had been hiding all along in the space between the wrong table and the right person. There is a version of this story where he said the right thing immediately. He would have been correct. And they would have been strangers. Instead, he sat at a table that wasn't his and looked up and made a choice that would cost him and reveal him and ultimately deliver him to a woman who had come against her better judgment and found, to her considerable annoyance, that something better than judgment was possible. We talk a lot about honesty as though it always arrives on time. But sometimes the truest things we have take longer to find their voice. Sometimes the most real conversation begins with a wrong name and ends with someone not quite turning at a corner, which is its own kind of answer. And sometimes, not often, not reliably, not on any schedule the universe cares to publish, the wrong table is exactly the right one. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this, someone who stayed when staying was the harder thing, someone who told you the truth at the expensive moment, someone who saw you clearly before you had finished deciding to be seen, say their name somewhere. Just their name. Nothing else. Some names deserve to be said out loud.